My name is Millie Phillips, she, her, and I will be your MC today. I have been active in the effort to create an alternative to our two ruling class parties for 50 years, most notably as the vice chair of the San Francisco Bay Area wide Golden Gate chapter of the 1990s Labor Party. Along with other members of that failed experiment who learned valuable lessons from it, I was a co-founder of Labor and Community for an Independent Party, LSIP, one of the co-conveners of this conference. Before we begin, we have a few things to review to make sure this conference goes as smoothly as possible. First, I apologize on behalf of our whole planning team for any issues you may have had with our Eventbrite registration invitation. And we want to thank our professional tech producer, Alicia Quirk, who had nothing to do with that, but who worked hard yesterday to come up with a workaround for its glitches. In a few minutes, I'll invite Alicia to say some words about our Zoom format, chat monitoring, and how to resolve any tech issues we may have during the conference.
Hello and welcome. Happy to have you here with us today. Want to let everyone know that we will be accepting questions for our panelists. We will hold to the end of each session. You can put those questions into the Q&A tab. That button is located on the bottom of your screen on your Zoom toolbar. We're not going to have them in the chat so that we can keep track of them and make sure we can answer as many of your questions as possible. If anyone is having technical difficulties, you can chat me. Doing a lot of things back here, but excited to be here with you today. All right, and that's all for me. Thanks, Millie.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. So let me review our agenda and guidelines today. We'll start with our opening speaker, Coral Wheeler. Then we will have two panels, followed by a 20-minute break, then two more panels. The panels will all be approximately 45 minutes each. The titles of them are in order: Building Independent Campaigns and Parties, Organizing Labor for Political Independence, We Refuse to Be Erased, Labor and the Plight of Immigrants and Indigenous People, and Black Liberation and the Fight for Independent Politics. The panelists will have a very limited time to speak, so we can also have time for you to enter questions and answers, as Alicia described. Then we will have a plenary session for full discussion, and then we'll end with our closing speaker, Nnamdi Lumumba. As far as the guidelines for the conference, each session and panel will have a facilitator and timekeeper. Again, we have a very tight schedule, so we'll be holding the panelists to their times. During the panels, please put any questions into the Zoom Q&A feature. During the plenary session, we will switch to a more open Zoom environment where everyone will be able to see each other and engage in full discussion. Each person will then have up to 2 minutes to speak. Before calling on anyone a second time, the facilitator will make sure that everyone who wants to speak has gotten a chance to speak at least once. This is a non-voting conference. Some proposals will be made during the plenary about how to proceed after this conference, but these are not binding on anyone. If you have other proposals, you are welcome to make them, though, and we invite anyone who is interested in working on your proposal to connect with you. We have adopted this approach because we know that though all of us would like to see alternatives to the two-party system, we may not yet be in complete agreement about how to move forward. So before we move on any further, I'd like to invite our Spanish-English interpretation team, Maria Martin and Melida Bermudez, to say a few words about how to access interpretation and to ensure that we all get to hear the content. So Maria or Melida?
Buenos dias, good morning. I'm working with Alicia because the interpreting, we're working with some bugs with the interpreting. So I just want to let everybody know, once we're good to go, they need to click. Usually there's a little globe, you click on it to make sure that if you want to hear the meeting in Spanish, okay? So we'll let you know in a few minutes when that's ready to go. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate that. So while they're working on that, let's begin with the regular program. So I'd like to introduce our opening speaker, Coral Wheeler. Coral is a longtime labor activist, first in the United Auto Workers and now the California Faculty Association. She is on the editorial board of the Organizer newspaper and a member of the National Continuations Committee of Labor and Community for an Independent Party, LSIP. She organizes locally for LSIP in Los Angeles. Welcome, Coral.
Thank you. Thank you, Millie, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I guess I'm honored to have been a long time organizer of anything. And it's a super wonderful privilege to be able to start off this incredible conference. As you heard from Millie, we have amazing panels geared toward action with incredible activists from many different organizations. And I'm excited for our plenary session where we're going to brainstorm next steps and send us all off with hope as we make concrete plans for the future. Because friends, comrades, brothers, sisters, cousins, nephews, we need hope in these times because things can start to look pretty bleak if you look around. The world situation is growing more dire every day. The brutal Ukraine war continues, having already taken hundreds of thousands of lives, and on which the Biden administration spent nearly 200 billion US taxpayer dollars. The situation in Gaza is also escalating, a brutal genocide funded by both major parties. And now Trump is making unhinged calls to deport all 2.4 million people from their homes. And more recently, Trump just bombed Iran, bringing the world once again to the brink of escalating conflict and closer to global war. Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Lebanon, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, as war increases, more and more people will die, all to satisfy the capitalist war machine that is supported by both major parties. Nationally, the situation isn't much or any better. Trump, joining forces with the richest man in the world, used DOGE to carry out massive spending cuts, cuts to public services, including SNAP, Medicaid. These cuts are ongoing. They're debating by just how much to cut. Meanwhile, the Democrats don't seem to be doing anything at all. But why would they? Most of their major donors stand to benefit from these cuts. In fact, let's not forget that the Democrats under Biden let emergency SNAP benefits and tax credit expansions expire, child tax credit expansions. Trump has laid off tens of thousands of federal workers, hundreds of thousands by some counts, which is not only an attack on these workers, but an attack on public sector unions. And as usual, Trump is ramping up and engaging in racist attacks. His entire campaign was based on racism and largely against racist attacks against Black immigrants. And now he's just revoked the legal status and work permits of hundreds of thousands of Haitian migrants who will be subject to deportation. It's notable that while only 5% of migrant workers are Black, they represent 20% of deportations. Speaking of deportations, many, of course, have heard in LA and across the country, ICE is ramping up, kidnapping people right off the street, conducting paramilitary-style raids with masked agents seen dragging people out of businesses, parking lots, homes, cars, smashing car windows, even pulling people out of their court-ordered immigration appointments at courthouses. When this ramped up a few weeks ago in LA, protests erupted immediately, and we were met with LAPD tear gas and stun grenades. Trump then deployed the National Guard and even the U.S. Marines against Los Angelinos. And so he was signaling his intent to crush the protest movement before it could spread. But people are fighting back. People are always fighting back. And they have been for quite some time. This rise in fascism is in fact a direct response to the unprecedented union and working class uprisings, particularly over the last 5 years. And recently we've seen one of the largest mobilizations in US history, with as many as 12 million people marching in the streets, marching against these fascist attacks, the expansion of presidential power, and against these brutal kidnappings. And all through this, where Where are the Democrats? Well, they're nowhere to be seen in this fight. They've in fact deported many more people than Republicans, and they fully embraced the anti-immigrant rhetoric in the last election. In LA, it's perfectly clear. The Democratic governor and the Democratic mayor of LA claim to be against ICE. Our governor likes to troll Trump online, and they claim to be on the side of the protesters, but the LAPD gasses protesters regularly, runs over them with horses, shoots them with rubber bullets. Notably, once the LAPD did get shot themselves with rubber bullets, but mostly it's directed, they shot themselves, but mostly it's directed at the protesters. So what are we doing? I'm with an organization called Labor and Community for an Independent Party, and I'm based in Los Angeles. And our primary goal is to build local assemblies built in labor and community groups. So labor and community assemblies. These assemblies would form the base for electing local candidates. They'd go door to door to campaign for them, but most importantly, they help create the candidates' platforms and advise their decisions once in office. They would hold these candidates accountable. The idea isn't to endorse this or that candidate, but to build the candidacy out of and from within these labor and community assemblies. So in LA, we have 99 things called neighborhood councils, sort of below city council for the 99 recognized neighborhoods in LA. And they have limited power, but they do have some funds. For example, they can put money towards printing Know Your Rights material that we can then pass out to impacted immigrants. So what we did in LA, we started with one single candidate from one neighborhood, a mother, a member of her PTA, and we walked with her kids and other people from the neighborhood door to door. We brought the kids. Toddlers love knocking on doors. They're a little too vigorous sometimes, but they love it. And we didn't have meetings, but we had sort of dinners and potlucks in the neighborhood, in our neighbors' homes. We held sign making parties. We tabled at farmers markets. We attended protests together. In some ways, the organizing was hard. I'm not a huge fan, despite my union background, I'm not a huge fan of knocking on doors, but this was different because we were local. If someone, the candidate could just say, hey, I live right down the street. And it really broke down some barriers, and we got people involved in the campaign that we met on the street. We found a second candidate, and I'm proud to say our two candidates won their positions in contested spots on their neighborhood council. So we're currently planning our victory party, and we're looking for other people who want to run in their neighborhood. Since the uprisings in LA, organizing has become both more difficult and less difficult. It's become harder because much of what's happening in LA is unorganized, and people are getting easily burnt out by attending various events. But it's easier because everyone, the entire city, wants to do something. What started as mass protests downtown has moved into neighborhoods. People want to build community protection networks, do ICE patrols, prevent kidnappings from occurring altogether. People also want to run for office. The need for local community protections for the neighbors, and making people consider running. So to wrap up, I'm seeing a time message. What we're doing is important in LA, but it's hard. It's a different way than most people think when they're running candidates. They think endorsements, they think larger campaigns. And honestly, in LA, we're struggling. We're still figuring it out. And I'm not claiming that what we've done and what we're doing is the only way to build independent politics, but it is a way. And it is a way that can work for any small group of people anywhere, especially if we join up and share stories. So thank you all so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And solo el pueblo, salva el pueblo.
So our first panel is Building Independent Campaigns and Parties. It's facilitated by Harpreet Chima with timekeeper Don Bryant. Harpreet will introduce the panelists, but let me introduce him. Harpreet is a member of Working Class Unity, a socialist organization based in California's Central Valley, San Joaquin County. Working Class Unity is dedicated to building independent working class infrastructure through tenant unions and workplace organizing. Dawn, a retired postal worker, is a longtime labor, anti-war, and Palestinian rights activist in Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome, Harpreet and Dawn.
Thank you so much, Millie. So our first panelist is going to be Shama Sawant, who was elected to City Council in 2013 and the first socialist in nearly a century. She won 4 elections during a decade in office, overcoming bitter opposition from big business and the Democratic Party. Her office won the First Nations highest minimum wage, the Amazon tax, and landmark renters' rights. Shama has refused to adopt a careerist approach or to make private deals with Democrats or business union leaders, and still building mass movements. Shama has since founded Worker Strike Back and is currently running as an independent socialist, anti-war, pro-worker candidate for US Congress against pro-genocide, warmongering Democrat Adam Smith.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. We know we have seen through the excitement of Zohran Mamdani's victory in the Democratic primary in New York that there is a decisive rejection of Zionism, and it also shows that working people want to deal a blow against the cost of living crisis, against the billionaire class. But we also know that the Democratic Party will not allow any semblance of a working class agenda. It is and always was a party of capitalism and imperialism. And the working class in the United States urgently needs a new party, a party rooted in militant working class movements, a party that fights for the working class, a party that does not attempt to make alliances with the capitalists or their political representatives, and a party whose representatives take home only the average worker's wage. That's why it's crucial to build movement right now, to build towards building that new party, to build movements independent of the Democrats and Republicans. And as part of those movements, to run independent campaigns that can show an example of how to fight the establishment. I strongly believe through our example in Seattle, which I'll talk about in a second, that it is not only important to be independent in name, that's obviously the first step, but it is important for our campaigns to demonstrate what a fighting strategy looks like against the Democrats and Republicans, and to have actual examples of victory where we have shown that we can change the balance of forces in favor of the working class and defeat the bosses and their parties. That's why we ran, my fellow socialists and I ran for Seattle City Council as independent socialists in 2013. That was our first election. And we used the campaign itself to build the fight for the $15 minimum wage, for taxing the rich, and for rent control. And after taking office in 2014, I launched the 15 Now movement and used my office to organize working class people to fight for 15. We won a historic victory despite big business, of course, but also the Democrats on the city council opposing 15 initially. And we used a fighting strategy, meaning publicly exposing the Democrats as what they actually are, calling them out by name publicly as representatives of big business and the wealthy, saying that they should be thrown out if they voted no on 15, not letting them pose as progressives, and also collecting 30,000 signatures for a ballot initiative as a credible threat that if the city council didn't pass this, we are going straight to the voters. And we also won inflation increases as part of that victory. And that's why today Seattle has the nation's highest minimum wage at $20.76. We used the same strategy in 2020 to win the Amazon tax, which raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year for affordable housing, including a dedicated fund for working class and poor Black families to have affordable housing. We have won unprecedented renters' rights victories. We in Workers Strike Back and my revolutionary organization, Revolutionary Workers, we believe that this fighting strategy is needed nationally. That is why we founded Workers Strike Back, and we are running for U.S. Congress in Washington state against a genocidal warmongering Democrat, Adam Smith. We're calling for an end to the genocide, end to all U.S. military funding for the Israeli state, end to the brutal occupation. We're campaigning for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, and for rent control nationally. Our opponent, Adam Smith, is a general among the war hawks. He is a Democrat who has sent tens of billions of dollars to fund the genocide. He also voted for the Iraq war in 2002. He is funded by dystopian war profiteering corporations like Palantir. Palantir's CEO is Alexander Karp, whom the Asian Times summed it up by saying Karp is building the operating system for perpetual war. Karp has already donated the maximum to Adam Smith for next year's election. Adam Smith has called anti-war protesters totalitarian and left-wing fascists. He has called for their arrests. He has the blood of over 400,000 Palestinians and 1 million Iraqis on his hands. He also supported the wars in Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and the current bloody inter-imperialist proxy war in Ukraine. He also voted to create ICE. I urge everyone here, especially representatives from labor unions, to strongly support our campaign and get involved. It is urgent that we mobilize rank and file workers, both in the non-unionized sector, which is the majority, and also in the labor movement, to seriously push back against the labor leadership that is tied, which is most of the labor leaders who are tied to the Democratic Party. That is part of the logjam. We need to break that. So please go to shamasawant.org to donate and to get involved. This is a national campaign. It doesn't matter where you live. We need your support and your active involvement. We have raised over $100,000 in the first 3 weeks of announcing the campaign, and we are organizing working people across the nation to win this victory. So I hope we'll have your support, and let's fight. Solidarity.
Right, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. Jill Stein. Jill Stein is a physician, an environmental health advocate, and an organizer. In 2006, she transitioned from clinical medicine into political medicine to help heal the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system that's literally killing us. She was the Green Party presidential candidate in 2012, 2016, and 2024, where she ran the only pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide campaign that was on the ballot for a majority of workers. That work continues in building the Green Party and laying foundations for cross-party solidarity and collaboration.
Thank you, Harpreet. Shall I jump in now? Great.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. And you're hearing me okay? Great. All right, terrific. Thank you all so much. Thank you very much, Harpreet. Thank you to all the organizers who really did incredible work bringing this together under very difficult and challenging circumstances. And thank you to everyone for being here to help fight for a world that works for working people and an America that works for working people. And specifically, we're here to lay the foundations for a political vehicle to help make this happen. And I, again, want to just give a shout out for Shama Sawant, who has been a real trailblazer in all regards here in creating a politics for working people. And I do encourage everyone to be involved in her campaign as a, really as a test run. Well, a winnable test run, shall we say, and a test run for the power of solidarity. And it would be great, I think, for us to be involved in a systematic way. I would say the same thing for Butch Ware, who's running for governor in California in a race where there's a real opening for a candidate who is an unabashed supporter of immigrant rights and working people and so on. And that would be another campaign, I think, for us to be involved in. But at the end of the day, it's really, you know, our local campaigns where that's where we build power. Having run for president 3 times, you know, I'm acutely aware that there's a role for for headliner high-level campaigns to challenge power and to lay out a vision and solutions that many people are otherwise not aware of. But where we build power is really locally. I can't stress enough how important that is. I just want to make a couple quick points because I know time is very short. I think the main point today is that this doesn't happen, you know, building solidarity and collaboration doesn't happen in one Zoom webinar. It's really, I think, very exciting for us to be building towards a conference in the spring where we can have more time to lay out what do these strategies and tools look like, because there are real practical aspects to, you know, how we do what Coral described by way of, you know, holding potlucks and sign making and just the logistics of building political alliances at the local level. And it would be great to have more time to share that. Right now, I just want to make a couple of general points. One is that this is a perfect storm right now for political change and for a real political transformation. The need for change has never been more urgent, and the possibility of that change has never loomed so large. We are facing crisis really in virtually every dimension of our lives. 2/3 of working people living paycheck to paycheck. Half of all renters are struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Homelessness is at unprecedented level. Child poverty rates doubled. Half of youth describe themselves as hopeless about the future. The environmental crisis is absolutely skyrocketing. Add to that the devastation brought about now by Donald Trump, the groundwork for which was actually laid by actions of the Democratic Party. I won't go into the details of that, but I think many people are aware of that. Both parties, meanwhile, are squandering half of our congressional budget on the endless war machine, fueling death and destruction around the planet, especially in the genocide going on now in Gaza, in the war in Iran, which is not over. there are enormous, crises that demand our action. The Democrats and Republicans will not fix this. The Democrats are not an opposition party, from Hakeem Jeffries declaring it's their government, meaning the Republicans, the DNC firing the elected vice president, the reformer David Hogg, and the assault that's taking place now on Mamdani. The Republicans are calling for his deportation, and the Democrats are really moving into the Cuomo camp as an independent. He's in the wrong party. I hope he makes a Dem exit, and I hope he commits also to ranked choice voting, which enabled him to win the primary. The Democrats withheld ranked choice voting as an option in the general election, which would allow much greater collaboration across party lines. The Democrats and Republicans are floundering. The Democrats are at a 27% favorability rate right now, the lowest ever. Trump got the lowest approval rating of any president ever at his 100-day mark, and it's only been downhill from there. Bottom line, we need solidarity to fight this. Divided, we're conquered. Unified, we can be unstoppable. Morena, our neighbor to the south, is an amazing example how they built solidarity. They came together as small independent parties and also with the social movements. They worked together to build solidarity for several years. After that, they declared a party, and it has absolutely transformed Mexico politics, and I think arguably politics all around the world. I won't say more at this point, except to close with Frederick Douglass: power concedes nothing without a demand. We must be that demand. And the words of Malcolm X: we are not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. So I hope going forward we have a very bold and unstoppable future working together. Thank you so much.
Our third speaker is Nnamdi Lumumba. He is the state organizer for the Ujima People's Progress Party in Maryland, the state's first Black workers-led electoral party. He serves as the National Recording Secretary for the National Black Radical Political Congress. He has participated in organizing African working class communities throughout the East Coast. Welcome, Nnamdi.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the panelists who came before me. So much experience, real on the ground experience that laid the groundwork for where we are today. I did want to talk about the kind of work that we're doing here in Maryland, especially representing the interests of Black workers, organizing ourselves and understanding the contradictions that exist in a capitalist nation like the US, and what it means to not just to Black and brown people, but all working class people in this country. I think it's always important to recognize that both capitalist parties, the Democrats and Republicans, do not just fail working people. Their job is to facilitate the exploitation and the transfer of wealth from working people to subsidize the wealthy. It's not, they're not doing their job. They are doing their job. And that is something that we have to make very clear to people in their lives and why it matters. We know that, at least in our community, the Democratic Party, it abuses its support that it gets from the Black community. It takes that Black community for granted and never really has an agenda, right? So it stays in power, but in local elections, in local policy, the things that impact our community: gentrification, police containment and abuse, miseducation, lack of development, the prison industrial complex, all of these things in city environments are facilitated by the Democrats. And that doesn't make the Republican Party its own an option for Black working people. Clearly, they're abusing their base of support, especially amongst white workers, right? We have to make it really clear that these two parties don't represent us. So why is it important that we have this moment, right? We have to go beyond just this question of individuals and how they run campaigns, win or lose, right? Having political organization, to have parties, to be able to have the power of our organization, all the connections, all the skills, all the training, all of that is an important factor. That this is the reason why all over this country, the Democrat and Republican Party make it so difficult for independent parties to consolidate themselves and have access to the ballot, because they recognize that once working class people have their own organizations, that even if they don't win the first election, they get stronger, they get better, they build out. We also recognize that more and more people are abandoning the Democrat and Republican Party. Right now, at this moment, we have registered more registered voters who have opted out of the Democrat and Republican parties. That is a national trend and it's not going back. But that also doesn't mean that they're still not voting for Democrats and Republicans. We have to build a real alternative. We have to give them a party that represents their interests and exposes what the Democrat and Republican parties do to working class people, right? I think that's important. We have to have the long view ourselves. Election campaigns are not just to win elections, they're to win working class power, right? We should not go into elections with the idea of maintaining class peace. We should use elections to disrupt the whole process, to open up and expose the contradictions that people are experiencing every day in their life that the Democrat and Republican parties refuse to respond to. We should not have class peace, right? We need a party that helps develop the kind of candidates and the kind of campaign committees that do this at the best possible way. I can't tell you that we're going to run campaigns of $100,000 or $1 million in every location, but every campaign should have a very efficient structure, right? We should know how to get our literature out. We should know how to connect to people. We should know how to follow up, because after the election, we have to consolidate that power. Right? We have to build institutions that come out of our work so that we have concrete proof that people are uniting with the ideas that we put out in our elections. Elections can't just be for class peace. This is what's important. We have to have the long view that if we lose the first election, all the work that we did allows us to be in a better position for the next election and the next election. Right? So that people themselves start to have a real option that they can recognize coming out of the electoral process. We cannot rely upon using the Democratic Party as that vehicle. They will do everything they can to undermine our participation, and more than anything, they will co-opt us if we stay in. And I think history is proof of that. So we're moving forward. I'm really appreciative of this process. If you know that the Democratic Party isn't serving us, then we are all incumbent to not just run against them, but to build institutional power, to create the instrument that will smash the Democratic Party, smash the Republican Party, and give people real answers and real political solutions that either the election will give us with a movement built around it, or we build a working class party, a working class organization that fights every day for those ideas. Thank you very much.
And last but not least is Jonathan Martin. Jonathan is a progressive third-party activist scholar and professor of sociology at Birmingham State University. For the past few decades, he has assisted, studied, and written about independent left campaigns and parties at various levels, always with a focus on how they can become more politically viable and successful. He is best known as the editor and contributor of the book Empowering Progressive Third Parties in the United States, published in 2016. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Harpreet. Great to be here. So I'm going to present a somewhat different but hopefully complementary message to previous speakers. I want to acknowledge that going forward, there's a strong potential for many more voters to be attracted to our parties, given the striking failure of the Democrats to prevent and fight a second Trump presidency and stop all of the awful things it's doing. But here's a critical challenge facing us. In one way or another, we've been here before many times. Maybe not this bad, but we've been here. Repeatedly, both parties have failed to address and even actively helped create one crisis after another, and directly or indirectly push politics towards a direction that has made life harder, more insecure, and more unjust for most people. Meanwhile, for several decades, polls have shown that most Americans not only prefer progressive policies on many issues and think our government is rigged against them, but since the end of the Obama administration, they've also come to believe that, quote, the two major parties are doing such a poor job that a third major party is needed, unquote. This has led to the expectation among some of us that the corporate duopoly is nearing the breaking point. And we just have to keep organizing as we have been and wait for it to implode. But that doesn't happen. The vast majority of Americans keep voting for corrupt major parties or not voting at all, with one crisis and pendulum swing after the next. And regardless of whether they are being victimized by right-wing Republicans or disappointed by centrist and progressive Democrats, they keep doing that. Now, why is that? Of course, there are serious structural obstacles to building a viable independent left alternative, including big money, biased corporate media, discriminatory election rules, and the persistent ability of major parties to co-opt and manipulate voters. But even with these obstacles, progressive third parties arguably should be doing a lot better than they are, especially at the local level where these obstacles are weakness. The important clue to this mystery is in the poll result I cited earlier, with most Americans wanting a third major party. Major. In other words, most Americans want a viable alternative with the capacity to win elections, not parties that are generally unable to compete. And the prevailing myth is that third parties can't win. So that's what I'm going to focus on in the rest of my talk, how these parties can become more successful electorally and be taken more seriously by the public. In my view, the most important thing we can do as much as possible is focus our resources and energy on developing and supporting races and campaigns that are best able to win or come close to winning. And one of these is Shama's campaign, which has already been talked about. She has a record that makes her well known and respected, and she has a real chance of winning. And support from around the country would be critical in helping her to win and become the only true challenger to duopoly in Congress. And it could inspire similar candidacies. And besides her campaign, there are still plenty of opportunities to make election breakthroughs at local levels, on municipal boards and commissions, city councils, and the rare state rep race. And people know that, it's easier to win at that level, to reach voters. And a lot of these races are technically nonpartisan or involve one major party candidate running unopposed with no lesser evil dynamic. So we should be focusing more on supporting these candidates in these kind of races and less on running expensive and draining higher level races, where for the time being, the chance of doing well is usually minimal. And we should focus less on perpetually launching exhausting and costly campaigns to gain statewide ballot access in order to run these candidates, where we get on what I call a ballot access treadmill. We should be pursuing more of these lower level victories where state ballot access is not needed, and they can become a springboard for more policy wins, inspire more strong candidates to run for and win these offices, and eventually create more viable candidates and campaigns for higher offices. And most importantly, they can dispel the popular view that third parties can't win. Of course, it's important to choose candidates who are capable of running strong campaigns, who are really well known. They can start campaigning early, they're willing to work hard, and they can recruit an army of helpers. But even to recruit these viable local candidates, we might need to build a local organization or proto-party first, kind of what Coral was referring to, or others have referred to as these community labor assemblies. They can make it possible to recruit a strong candidate and to convince them that they have the ability to win. Ultimately, party builders have to think carefully about where the best places are to organize, where conditions are the most conducive to building the foundation for election breakthroughs, and how to make that happen. And they need to be flexible. In some places, building an organization first is important. In other places, recruiting a candidate who can help to build the organization might be the way to go. To conclude and sum up, in various ways I've been saying, when it comes to building independent left politics, if we want to be effective, we need to be selective. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Now we have the Q&A section. So please go ahead and use the Q&A form to submit any questions, and we'll present them to the panel. As a first question, I'm going to take this opportunity to ask my own question. So some argue that the Democratic Party line is less of a formal ballot line. That's the important part, but it's more of the network of funders, consultants, media outlets, and informal power structures behind it that discipline candidates, that's the important part. And if you agree with this analysis, then does having an independent ballot line actually create independence from these networks of donors and gatekeepers? After all, we're seeing Cuomo run as an independent, but we know that the Democratic Party is the people that are backing him, this network of people that I'm talking about. And we've seen Democrats adopt and mimic progressive rhetoric before, so what is stopping them from adopting the strategy of labeling themselves as third party? And so would your recommendation be that people focus on the third party, or instead to focus on building these parallel structures that could sustain independent politics rather than just prioritizing independent ballot access? And I think we have 2 minutes for answers, so whoever wants to take it can go ahead. Or I'll give it to you, Jonathan, since he's one. Oh, no, he raised his hand. All right, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I think clearly the broad term third party does not have an indication of what your class interests are. So I think we just need to make sure it's clear that there are a bunch of third parties that already exist that have access to the ballot today, right? You have all sectors, whether they're to the left of the Democrat or right of the Republican Party, they already exist. I think what is really clear is that we have to emphasize third parties that are clearly working class oriented and produce their own independent capacity to run candidates. I think that's just a part of the discussion because we don't want to get caught up in the general question about access. Okay. And this is a question from Justin. How can we organize within our unions and community organizations to fight for them to support campaigns like Shama's campaign for Congress? Any examples of how we've overcome the often conservative Democratic Party aligned union leadership of these organizations? Shama, I think, yeah, you have experience with this, so go ahead.
Yes, I think it's very, very important that rank and file union members not accept that the line of the leadership, the labor leadership, often that they should by default support Democratic candidates, and actually, unfortunately, in some cases, also Republican candidates. And so I think concretely, for people who are watching this and you are in a union and you want to push your union leadership to support our campaign, Revolutionary Socialist Campaign for US Congress against a genocidal warmongering Democrat, then I think the first step will be to first of all, talk to your coworkers. And we have petitions that you can use, which are very useful for political conversation starters. And they lay out the case. The petitions lay out the case for why rank and file union members should support our campaign. And so if you're in the Seattle area, then concretely what you should do is talk about our campaign to your coworkers and your fellow union members, bring them out to our canvassing shifts and let them experience the support that our campaign has among working class people. People are super excited about fighting the genocide, about dealing a blow to the genocidal party, and also about healthcare. I mean, the healthcare demand is incredibly popular. So I hope there's also a question about, I hope somebody asked a question also about how we can win concretely healthcare. So first of all, organize your own coworkers. Think of your effort as organizing within the union movement, bring them out, and also fight for union resolutions. You know, put forward a resolution in your union local that demands that your union local endorse our campaign for Congress and also make donations from the union to our campaign. That resolution itself becomes a vehicle for debate inside the union. And that's what we want more than anything. The first step inside the labor movement is to provoke a debate where the rank and file can have a voice against the leadership, which most of the time goes unquestioned.
Okay. And one more question is, so, you know, we've talked about, or how do we take this beyond the ballot box? So we've talked about getting people involved in kind of electoral politics, whether it's third party third party. But we know it's important to get the working class to do more than just, you know, pull the lever during election season or sign on to a ballot initiative. So what are some ways that you think we could get people involved, getting them understanding that they can have an impact on their lives when they are willing to organize and willing to take collective action?
People are out there organizing right now, you know, whether it's to prevent, displacement from their apartment building, and rent increases, or, on the war in Gaza, huge mobilizing issue. Unions that are struggling for recognition, for us to show up, I think is really important, and to become, to really provide solidarity for the groups and the networks that are already there. That is, one really important way to, provide a basis for collaboration, so that you're not trying to just hijack people into your political campaign, but that we're there on the ground to support what's really critical in your community. And then, you begin to develop a common culture and networks and relationships from which you then begin, to lift people up and help people run, like in the fight related to, fighting for immigrant rights and against deportations. We have a Boston City Council election coming up, and we should be running a candidate who's going to fight, against the policies in the schools that shut down discussion of the genocide. We should be fighting for schools to be protecting kids against ICE and so on. So there's just so many ways that these issues are really hot in our communities, and people are already fighting right now. So it's not like you have to scratch your head and figure out, how do we connect with people? You just get out there and be a part of the movements in your community, and to help empower people to take those movements into halls of power, whether it's school committees or, labor coalitions, or, fight for healthcare, the city councils and so on, rent boards. There are just a gazillion low-level positions that people can run for, and we can help provide support to community leaders who are already in the fray. And that's kind of the magical combination to, to make this work.
I would just add that, as in the campaigns that I've studied, as a campaign gets going and it seems like it has more and more potential and people think that it actually has the ability to win, they go from feeling more passive to being excited and inspired, and they're more likely to join. I mean, that's how like an army of volunteers develops in this type of campaign. And, it's also related to the question about unions. How do you get unions to endorse these campaigns? Well, the stronger they seem, the more likely the unions are to support them. A lot of the reason they don't, and I know they're co-opted too, but a lot of the reason they don't support third-party campaigns, left third-party campaigns, that is because they don't think they can win. So I wouldn't underestimate the value of being viable in terms of attracting support, both from organizations and individuals. Active support, that is.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add to that point, because for most people in America, the point of reference of politics is elections, right? And that somehow when elections end, their participation in politics ends as well. And the truth is that we're always dealing with policy decisions, right? Whether it's in the housing situation, a healthcare situation, political prisoners, even just relatives who are in prison, right? We're always dealing with policy. I want people to really grasp this idea, and it was used often in revolutionary struggle in Africa. The more sweat and peace, the less blood and war. Preparing people to engage in political action, the organizing, the ideas, raising your own resources. If we teach our communities, working class communities, to do those things outside of elections, when it's time to go into election, you have a much more motivated base, you have a much more and deeper engagement, and it makes it possible that winning elections can happen because you're not just running as an independent, you're representing people in a real base that you built. I think we can't underestimate the work that happens outside of the electoral arena, taking working class issues.
Exactly.
All right, thank you, everyone. We had one question for Shama about Medicare for All, about how to hear more from her about how she can concretely fight for Medicare for All, and to expand on this, understanding that if we're probably going to get Medicare for All, it's going to involve not just dealing with the people that are in office, but also outside the halls of power in the, you know, economic realm, dealing with these big corporations and you have big corporations that have so much economic control in our healthcare system. Like, how do you counter and inoculate people against them going to their doctor and all of a sudden them getting flyers about how, hey, well, Shama's policy is going to shut us down in 6 months if it passes. So how do you inoculate the public against the propaganda that will come if you convince somehow a majority of other people in Congress to want to pass this?
Well, first of all, to be clear, we're not going to convince the Democrats to pass this in Congress. The Democrats or Republicans will not allow Medicare for all if they can help it. They're both parties of United Healthcare and all the health insurance and big pharma, not to mention the Wall Street and uber rich who profit from the sickness and death of tens of millions of tens of millions of working class people and poor people, and probably far more than that. And actually, what the Democrats do is slimy and duplicitous. For over 20 years, from all the way from John Conyers to now Pramila Jayapal and AOC, they've been bringing some version of the Medicare for All bill forward with no intention of ever letting it come to a vote, let alone a winning vote. The history of how other industrialized nations, but just to be clear, the reason they do that and the reason it's duplicitous is that they want to keep working people always hanging, feeling that, oh, maybe someday, somehow the Democrats will pass Medicare for all. That's never going to happen. The history of how other industrialized nations like Canada and the UK won big public healthcare was through militant labor movements. And by winning public healthcare in a local area, like in Canada, it was first won in Saskatchewan province, and it became so popular, and there was so much of a clamor among the Canadian working class for that public health care that the federal government, which actually was a Tory government, conservative government, they were forced to pass public health care nationally, Medicare for all nationally, because they were so afraid that there was going to be a revolutionary uprising if they didn't do it. That's the approach we need to use, just like 15 spread throughout the nation, because we won here through a fighting movement and we forced the Democrats to vote yes on it. That is how we're going to win. So in addition to our congressional campaign, we have also launched a campaign for a free healthcare for all ballot initiative in Seattle. So we're going to be building support for that ballot initiative alongside our congressional campaign. And that is free healthcare for all, regardless of immigration status, gender affirming care, all of that funded by taxing the rich. And in Seattle, we already have won the Amazon tax. So the ballot initiative will say that the Amazon tax needs to be raised to about $5 billion in order to fund this. And yes, it will be a big fight, but if we can win here, then we can actually spread it across the nation, and it will put real concrete pressure on the Democrats and Republicans.
Okay. Nam already answered this, but I think it's an important question. We know there's a schism between Latino groups and Black activists. And often this is because people are fighting for crumbs. They feel like there's a shrinking pie, and now you feel communities feeling like we were here first, or, why is that group getting this and we're not getting it? What can be done to join these organizations so we can unite against white supremacy and exploitative capitalism? So yeah, Namdi, if you want to answer that again, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think part of it is really important. Solidarity is forged. It's not just given away, right? All the miseducation that we're getting in this system, the culture that we've been indoctrinated into makes us compete, not only as individuals, but as communities for what crumbs capitalism will give us. And it's baked in, right, to the cake. And the truth is that when you're talking about, especially at the local level, there's a lot more engagement between communities, right, that happen every day, whether it's around culture, whether it's around working together, the issues that you share by being neighbors. Those things are organic, but they're not organized. I think a lot of this question comes first and foremost from the propaganda that we're given, right? That somehow it's the miseducation. I mean, who are Latinos? Latinos represent a wide spectrum of ethnicities and nationalities and histories in America and histories not in America. We don't understand that, and we're not given any education. We also have to recognize that in each of our communities, we have middle class elements who are legitimately fighting with each other for crumbs and handouts and appointments, and they need to stir that pot. They need to be able to compete for these limited resources that the Democrats and Republicans hand out as goodies, right? So they need a divided working class. I think, again, education is going to be fundamental to this happening in the best way possible. We can't move forward by just showing up. We have to understand, what are we fighting for? Who is the enemy, right? We have to understand what real solidarity looks like. Solidarity isn't just me marching with you. It's being able to articulate your struggle. It's providing financial resources, educating other people in my community about your community. There's a lot of stuff that we need to do, to get to a real.
Shama, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just add to the important points that Namdi made, I really agree with Namdi that we need political education that will allow people to understand that actually we may have somewhat different needs. Some of the specific oppressions that are experienced by immigrant people different than the oppression that is experienced by Black Americans, and all of that is true. And the fight against oppression has to be united, and that we are not each other's enemies, but our collective enemy is our bosses. They get to keep wages for all and wages low and working conditions bad for all workers, as long as there are exploitable immigrants. So as long as there are undocumented immigrants that get to be paid very low wages, that also is the weapon, the divide and conquer weapon that the bosses use to keep everybody's wages in check. And I think in addition to this kind of political education, and that political education has to go hand in hand with concrete struggle. We need concrete campaigns that will unite the working class. I mean, we saw the tremendous support that Bernie had for his whole campaign program. Bernie's fault was not the campaign program he ran on. His fault was that he thought that he could have a political revolution against the billionaire class inside the party of the billionaire class. And he still does that. In fact, he has now gone off the deep end. He's capitulating completely to the Democratic establishment, the Democratic Party. And so what we need to do is to remember that actually there is phenomenal majorities of Americans, working class people who support free healthcare, taxing the rich to fund affordable housing and public schools, and all of those kinds of progressive economic policies. Just to give a concrete example, we were fighting for the Amazon tax in Seattle in 2020, and that was in the middle of the George Floyd rebellion, the Black Lives Matter movement. And at that time, the Democratic Party had the support by what I would call the black misleaders who went around telling ordinary Black people, Black working class and poor people, that, hey, you should not support the Amazon tax movement because that is not a Black issue. And what we did was we refused to accept the gatekeeping by these misleaders and by the Democratic Party. We said our loyalty lies with the working class of Black America, not with you gatekeepers. And we went directly with our petitions to the thousands upon thousands of people who were fighting in the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was hugely popular. The Amazon tax demand was hugely popular, and that is how we got 30,000 signatures, 10,000 at the rate of 10,000 signatures a month from Black working class people and a multiracial working class that was out there fighting against police brutality. And that is what put pressure on the misleaders to back off, and then for the Democrats to actually vote yes on it. And so I think if we have concrete campaigns, that is a really fantastic way of pushing back against the divide and conquer.
Okay. One more question that I have, and this is somewhat geared towards you, Swamp, but anyone can answer. So you've served as what someone call a tribune of the people, an elected socialist who, maintains accountability to their organization, making sure that they don't get absorbed by the Democratic Party. And this model assumes that the elected official will agitate, will demonstrate the effectiveness of a disciplined socialist politics, and that the organizations that are around the selected official would grow. That way they could increase their own outside influence. And yet, from what I understand, socialist alternative at the time did not grow alongside like your actual political achievements. But maybe I'm wrong. And that the bench on Seattle City Council was not filled with more salons. And it was actually very difficult to maintain your seat since the Democrats were just constantly trying to recall you instead. Looking back, what do you think explains this dynamic? If I have it right, was it specific to Seattle's context, limitations of SA's organizing model, or do you think it points to a broader challenge for this Tribune strategy that should be considered for people who do want to run third party and then act as this organizing hub in their community. And what lessons would you draw for other groups that maybe try and replicate what you did in Seattle?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this question. First of all, it's not true that Socialist Alternative didn't grow at the time. I mean, that's my former organization, and I'll come to that in a second. In fact, between when I won my first city council campaign in 2013 and when we won $15 an hour, so by the end of 2015, that 2-year period when we won our first election, which was historic, it was the first elected socialist in 100 years in Seattle, in a whole century, and the $15 minimum wage, which was absolutely historic. Between that period, Socialist Alternative actually tripled in size, and it was an actual example of how working and young people will be inspired to become politically active when they see a strategy actually working. It's not, we are not here to pontificate just in abstractions. As Karl Marx says, the philosophers have interpreted the world that the point is to fight to win a better world. And that's what we showed. And as far as Socialist Alternative is concerned, the reason myself and many others who are now in Workers' Strike Back and who are now in Revolutionary Workers, the reason we left Socialist Alternative was precisely that the rest of the leadership, I was in the leadership of Socialist Alternative also, but the rest of the leadership unfortunately took that abstract model. They didn't really want to fight on these things. They didn't want to actually carry forward our fighting strategy. And actually, to be honest with you, that type of do nothing politics in the socialist movement and also on the left, it is endemic to the left. That comes not from just laziness, it comes from a reluctance to take on a fight against the Democrats, against the labor leadership, because the kind of fight that's needed under capitalism, under capitalism, everything is stacked against the working class. The only way to tip the scales, to change the balance of power, is to take on an almighty fight. There is no other shortcut. There is no shortcut that has to be done. And unfortunately, most leaders are unwilling to take that fight. And actually, we have to really commend Dr. Gilstein also for taking on that fight repeatedly, because it is not easy, because you become, you get a target on your back. And so it is really political opportunism that led most of the leadership of the Socialist Alternative to refuse to support what we were doing. And ultimately, it became untenable for us to remain in that organization. That's why we launched Revolutionary Workers as well. However, as far as your other question is concerned, well, it was difficult to maintain your position. You came under attack. So is this somehow brings the fighting strategy into question? No, absolutely not. My point would be the exact opposite. What I would say is that as an elected official, if your every subsequent election is not a bigger fight than the previous one, then you are selling out. That is a rule of thumb. It's a barometer for how much you're fighting back, because the ruling class sees you as a threat. So it was absolutely no surprise. And not only that, I took it as a badge of honor that every subsequent election of mine was a bigger fight, because the billionaire class was even more determined. The Democratic Party was even more determined to defeat us, because they had seen what we were capable of. We refused to sell out. We refused to make backroom deals with them. And we also defeated them in their attempt to marginalize and isolate me. In fact, what we did was we brought the army of the working class into City Hall. So expect every next election to be a bigger fight. And the way you win is by mobilizing and organizing working class people even bigger. That is why I never lost an election. I mean, you can never guarantee that you're going to win an election. That would be foolish of anyone to guarantee anything. But the point is that it is possible to win. And we have shown that we were up for election 4 times and we won all of those 4 elections, keeping in mind that the last election was not even a real election. It was a recall attempt against me, and we defeated them despite everything being stacked against us.
Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, if I can just jump into and underscore all of that, because in fact, what Shama said needs to be generalized nationally, because when people tell you as an independent, people-powered political party that you are small and weak and resistance is futile, this is the propaganda of the oligarchy and the war machine. And our public has been so miseducated in that propaganda. Simply surviving, if you are able to survive as an organization, that is a revolutionary act. And when people say, for example, oh, the Greens, you're so weak, I always say, yeah, right, like compared to who? All the other nationwide political parties that ever managed to get visibility on a national stage, they are gone within 10 years. Even the Labor Party, which was founded at the same time as the Greens, 40 years ago or so, they never got to actually even run candidates because they could not overcome the resistance, the third party bashing and the spoiler thing. They had far more resources and infrastructure, but they couldn't get out of the starting gate. Peace and Freedom, which was another people-powered party that came into prominence at the time of the Vietnam War. And at most, they got to like 14 or 16 states or so. Now they live in 1 or 2. Simply surviving, simply continuing the fight, living to fight another day is an incredible victory on the unbelievably tilted playing field that we exist on. So when you fight a political battle, it's never over. And as Shama said, you have to be prepared to defend your victory. One other quick example, in Massachusetts, we passed campaign finance reform. I think it was in 1998 by voter referendum, by a huge margin, by 60%, because the legislature wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. We passed it by voter referendum. It was then attacked by the Democrats, who had the huge majority in the legislature. They repealed it on a voice vote within 1 or 2 years, so it never got out of the starting gate. But because, in my view, that coalition was Democratic Party led, and they were not prepared to keep fighting. Your battle is not over in the very toxic political environment that we live in right now. You are signing up for a lifelong battle, but if you don't fight that lifelong battle, it's kind of curtains. This is really the only way forward, is getting out of this morass. So it is a badge of honor. Learn to think of it as that. And, congratulations to Shama for continuing to fight that battle. Keep it up. You're fighting for all of us.
All right, thanks so much. Sorry, Jonathan, we're here at 10:13. They're moving us off the stage, but feel free to type a response up in the chat. So yeah, thank you everyone so much for being on panel 1. I think this was a great discussion.
Yeah,
and
great.
If people have more questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A, and hopefully the panelists can answer your questions there.
Thank you, Harpreet. Good job.
Thank you all.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Wasn't that an amazing panel? So let's move on to our second panel, which is Organizing Labor for Political Independence. And it's going to be facilitated by David Barkley with timekeeper John Harris. Unfortunately, panelist David Giltner with the Labor Party, see votelabor.org, had to cancel at the last minute. We apologize for that. And our facilitator will introduce our first 2 panelists, and would also appreciate if David Barkley could introduce himself, because I didn't receive an introduction yet from him. So David, if you could introduce yourself and also the speakers, that would be wonderful. Thank you, David Barkley, and turn it over to you.
To answer the last question while we're waiting. And I just wanted to say that I think it's important not to judge the success of a party by how many people it gets elected to a certain body, because a small number of people, even one person, can have a huge impact, as Shama herself showed on the Seattle City Council, that can be very disproportionate to their representation on a particular body. And that goes for other bodies too. So while it would be great to get more people on a body like that from the party, it's not necessarily the most important way to judge their impact.
Perhaps if there were other unanswered questions from the previous panel, they could be addressed right now too, while we resolve this, while our tech team resolves our tech issue. Thank you.
All right. Apologies for the delay. We're trying to get. Okay, Harpreet. You're going to help
Yeah,
us out.
sorry,
Pinch
we're-
it. Thank you.
We're just having some tech trouble on the back end, but we're just going to continue panel one's Q&A in the meantime. So one result of the Zoran campaign in New York City, where he did win the Democratic primary for mayor, was that a large portion of his base was kind of the middle class, working class, and it leaned a lot younger. And a lot of his voting base was either white or Asian. And so one question is that when you are running in cities like New York City, where you can win a primary without having won the working class Black and brown vote, who is still largely voting for the Democratic Party because they're stuck in that kind of machine politics, due to nonprofits, churches being so tied to the hip to the Democratic Party. How do you make sure that moving forward, that you're not going to totally lose sight of the fact that there is a large section of the working class that is either not voting or not voting for you, even if you are able to win primaries like this? And how do you make sure you don't focus your politics on that kind of middle class or aspiring middle class instead, since they're the ones that delivered you your electoral win?
Well, can I?
Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah.
I'll use just the Maryland and Baltimore example in what we've seen in running in local elections. One is that, especially during the primaries, the turnouts historically are very low. If you get 25 or 30% of the electorate to turn out, that usually is considered a fairly decent election. So it's not like even people who are registered Democrats aren't excited about their options. And then usually the general elections tend to be weaker. Just depends on the slotting with what's happening nationally, right? I think the opportunity is part of that. Yes, there are lots of people disengaged, and finding a way to engage them during the electoral cycle is important. But I think we can't limit that discussion to what happens in the election, right? Because you're talking about a very small amount of time to get people to do that. We really have to have real strategies. Like, it's important to get on the ballot is part of that, so people can join and be a part of the base. But also the kind of organizing that we do before the election, it helps mobilize sectors of the community, especially in the Black community, because it's all about building relationships. You go from, I literally, when I ran, my opponent, his winning argument with his base was, I'm some kind of fanatic socialist, and who knows what will happen if you vote for a socialist. Well, damn it, Democrats have run this city into the ground, and we had over 300 people dying a year. That's not the responsibility of the socialists, right? We didn't do that. That's the capitalist Democratic Party allowing that to happen. So we have to build relationships and take those relationships into electoral struggle, raising resources, education. There's a lot of work that we have to take on as a part of that, because the truth is the Democratic and Republican Party rely on people's ignorance, right, to vote either for the wrong candidate or just stay home.
I can
Jill?
piggyback on that. Zoran came out of left field, like a bolt of lightning, and really rose very quickly. And it's not surprising that in communities that had traditional ties to the Democratic Party, like through the Black church and so on, it was, he did especially poorly in low-income communities and in very high-income communities. And it takes a while to get to sort of get past the roadblocks that are put up by the usual system. The issues that he was running on and is still running on, have a lot of traction, and they're very pervasive. That is transportation and childcare, general affordability, rent stabilization. And there's a good chance, because of the way power works in New York City, that he he has a good chance of delivering actually on stabilizing rent. But it will be very hard for him to deliver on everything else because New York is basically a tool of Wall Street, and New York politics is very much dominated by Wall Street. So New York is really just kind of a microcosm of the bigger system, which is extremely stuck and very rigged against working people. So, given the attack that's happening on him right now, it's once again just showing that you cannot be a democratic socialist because the democratic part of that equation is going to crush the socialist part of that equation. Also, ranked choice voting, I want to stress, he benefited enormously. That is, Zoran benefited from the endorsement of Lander, who was, sort of like a touchstone for the Jewish community. And because he had Lander's endorsement, they mutually cross-endorsed. That gave him, enormous power. People had permission to vote for an underdog in a ranked choice voting system. It was not by accident that the Democrats in New York City and the city council, as progressive as they were about ranked choice voting, they would not allow it to be applied outside of the Democratic Party. They are still crushing competition. I would really like to see Zoran take a very affirmative stance right now on ranked choice voting. He can't change the general that's coming up, but he could bring more people into his coalition right now if he was very clear that he is seeking to empower people-powered politics beyond the constraints of the Democratic Party by supporting ranked choice voting. He could do that without taking on some incredible risk, and I think it would really help him create a more unified coalition to fight back against the incredible racism and Zionism and Wall Street and the real estate industry that are just coming after him right now with their fangs and their talons out. It's kind of a case study in why the current political system is always going to self-destruct if left to its own devices. We really, I don't advise anybody to hold their breath like as if, the big faith that was put in AOC or even in Bernie Sanders for that matter, they all disappointed. And that's why I think so many of us that have been through this before, we're just kind of rolling our eyes, we're going to see another little Obama blip and then it'll be gone.
Mhm.
Or India Walton, more to the point, India Walton, who won the mayoral Democratic primary in Buffalo, and then the Democrat loser, the very oppressive, repressive incumbent, ran as an independent, and that's just what Cuomo's doing right now. This is all just straight out of their playbook, and it drives home why we have to fight their whole playbook. And just putting your faith into Zoran or abandoning the continuing push for independent politics would be a disaster. So, keep up the fight.
Yeah, thank you so much. So one more question we have from the audience from last time, which we can get to now.
Oh,
Was
we're
a
here.
question.
Sorry, we're here now.
Oh, you guys are ready? Okay.
Yep.
We're gonna switch off then.
Please answer in the chat. Thank you so much, panel one. Panel one was so good. We got extra panel one. I'm loving it.
All right. Thank you again, everyone.
Really appreciate it. Okay, yeah, technical difficulties abound. Our facilitator for this panel was not able to join, so I'm stepping in. And so for panel two, as I think Millie also met one of our panelists, was unable to attend, but we have two amazing panelists to talk about getting the labor movement involved in this effort. We have Chris Silvera. Chris Silvera is the Secretary Treasurer of the Teamsters Local 808 in New York. And we have Donna DeWitt. Donna DeWitt's the President Emerita of South Carolina AFL-CIO. Member of the Continuations Committee of LSIP and I think a founding member, I believe, the South Carolina Labor Party. Awesome. And I'm so pleased to have you both. Please, I don't know if you had a plan on who would go first, or should I? Chris, go for it.
I yield to the Queen, Donna DeWitt.
Fantastic,
Hey.
Donna.
Hey, Chris, and thank
Hey,
you.
my sister, good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. And thanks to the organizers and all of the speakers. It's been amazing being able to do this. And welcome from South Carolina. in South Carolina, the issues are quite different from some of the states that have been represented here today. The comparison, you know, we all have unique issues. In South Carolina, the population is like 5.5 million with 26.5% Black and Hispanic, 2.5%. The union representation for union members is 2.8%. That's the third lowest above North Carolina and South Dakota. And we've seen a shift in the traditional organizing of labor in South Carolina because that 2.8 is actually up some. And those increases that we're seeing are from a lot of the service workers industry, and campus workers, Starbucks workers. And then we have auto plants there's planning and organizing. And looking at how we can involve labor in independent politics, in 2020, the turnout was a 72.10%, and in 2024 was a 76.76 turnout. And there are a lot of reasons that in a state like South Carolina, other than right to work and, you know, the history that we have. Now we have the South Carolina Workers' Party, which I'm proudly affiliated with, which was formerly the South Carolina Labor Party. And we're looking ahead to 2026 races and trying to involve labor. We have 13 candidates that are looking to be potential candidates for the Workers' Party. There's a lot of enthusiasm. In 2024, we ran a Senate race and we received almost 21% of the vote. We had two House races. One was urban, where we received 7.65% of the vote, and one was very, very rural, one whole small county and two other small counties. And we did not receive but about 1.83% of the vote in that rural area. So in our races that we're looking at next time from those 13 candidates, everything from House seats, council seats, and also a state race. I wanted to mention the state race because we think there's a really good opportunity. And that is that we have two candidates on the Republican side looking to run for governor. One is our Attorney General, Alan Wilson. The other is our Congresswoman, Nancy Mace. It just so happens that the chair of the South Carolina Workers' Party's last name is Mace also. And he's the one that got the almost 21% in the Senate race. So we're going to have fun with this probably. We're going to have two Maces on the gubernatorial ticket. And we're hoping a lot of people won't look at it close and, you know, hit our Mace. We're looking at that. So we're also having fun with that. We have a lot of issues, like all of you. But most of you probably heard, you know, just last Tuesday where the Supreme Court ruled 4-3. And this was a case that was on Thursday, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it was on Thursday, a case that was filed by a South Carolina woman and Planned Parenthood. No, and I'm sorry. That was a 6-3 vote on the Supreme Court. An opinion written by Justice Neil Gorsuch, which would say, in essence, that their decision would exclude Planned Parenthood from the state's Medicaid program on the basis that the organization provides abortions. And just recently, we had in the only city in South Carolina that we have a ban on conversion therapy. The state passed legislation that would take funding from any city that enforces bans on conversion therapy. So Columbia would lose over $3 million. So they passed last Tuesday on a 4-3 vote. They passed, and they repealed that in Columbia. So there are a lot of resources that we can look at in our opportunities to organize for labor. And I've been really, really proud to see the work going around the service workers and campus workers and Starbucks workers, the education going into the auto industry, expanding in a Southern right to work state. But one of the greatest resources we have is coalitions, and a lot of you had talked about that. But the greatest example I think we have is No King's Day. Across the country, the coalitions here in South Carolina, the capital, were about between 5,000 and 6,000 people. But all over the state, even in little rural towns, people came out for No King's Day. That was an issue, the issues that we're looking at now that people spoke out against. And I recently spoke this week also at the 25th anniversary of the successful campaign of the Charleston Five. These were international longshoremen that were charged with conspiring to incite a riot in 2000 while peacefully protesting non-union workers performing their jobs in the port. And they were under house arrest for 18 months. And so I conclude the lessons we learned and the elements of that campaign and any good campaign throughout the history for success are: one, fearless leaders. And they definitely were there with the campaign for the Charleston Five, are strong union members, and carrying out a well-planned strategy. And committed internal, external participants. The only other conclusion is fighting for what is right is never wrong. So let's continue the fight for independent politics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. Fantastic. Chris, please, when you're ready.
Good afternoon. Maybe it's still morning in California, I'm not sure. So first of all, I just want to thank that first panel, Nnamdi Lumumba, Sharma Sawant. I'm not sure what to add after listening to those folks. I mean, it was thoroughly engrossed, but we have to get to the union members, because the leadership of the union is driven by businessmen. We have very few trade unionists in the real sense of what a trade unionist is left in the labor movement. So what we really have are labor businessmen who are just no different than an insurance sales rep. You know, so I sell the union, hey, I'm going to get you a good contract, I'm going to get you health care, I'm going to get you these things, but not recognizing that in the history of not only this country, but of most countries, the labor movement or organized labor has never been the largest group of the working class, but we are the vanguard of the working class. And so therefore we have to find a way to talk to, what I tell people is that right now they're on the Democratic ship and they're sailing on the ship and they're not going to jump off the ship into water. So we have to be building a ship alongside this thing so that we can offload people onto this new ship. I'm not critical of Bernie. I'm not critical of anybody who attempts to break the capitalist stranglehold on the working class, because what they're doing is really revolutionary work. What we have to be very careful about, and I was just listening to some people on Sirius Radio, and really struck me that when I listen to these particularly Black spokespeople, they're always talking about entrepreneurs, and everybody's an entrepreneur. And I kept thinking, you know, it's nowhere in the history of the world have the majority of the people been entrepreneurs. The majority of the people have always been workers. But somehow we keep driving people into dreamland. and that our work as LCIP, as people doing this type of work, is to make people understand the importance of the independence. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are so ingrained in the society that I think we have to not, that we don't bash them, but that we educate workers to that they will bash them themselves, right? Because when we talk about universal health care, when we talk about what a real living wage looks like, when we talk about what are the conditions that we are interested in creating and progressing, I think when you start to do those things, workers, I represent a predominantly white local. It's a strange thing. I think for most of them don't know. And maybe 75% of those white members are Trump supporters. But I still have to talk to them every day, and I still have to convince them of things, and I still have to make them understand why Trump, why the Republicans, why the Democrats are not functioning in their interest, right? So that there is this thing that's being told, well, you know, it's the left hand and the right hand. Well, yeah, but there's a leg and two legs, and there's, you know, there's a stomach and there's a heart and there are livers and kidneys. So it's not just these two things, there are other things. And we have to start to communicate. We have to get involved in local union politics at the city council level, at the state level. We have to target. So, and I'm jumping around a little bit because just as things come to my mind, because I don't want to repeat what Namdi and them had spoken about because they were so eloquent. But Letitia James, in her first election, ran solely on the Working Families Party line, the third party in New York, and won, right? So this is something, so it's not impossible. These are things that we can do. We have to target specific areas. We have to know what, you know, what's the demographics of that area. If you look at Namdami here in New York, I might be crushing his name a little bit because I didn't know about him until about 2 months ago. The majority of Blacks didn't support him. So that means that there's someone else telling people about personalities and not talking to people about issues that are real to them and their community. So that there's a lot of work that we as labor have to do in getting our larger entities, our joint councils, our internationals. Our international right now is in La La Land with Trump. We're actually running a candidate against him, a young gentleman out of Local 623 in Philadelphia, Richard Hooker, because when you have a general president that is so out of touch with what the workers in his union wants, we have to, he actually hired one of the marchers from the Charlottesville march. I mean, once it became public, they had to get rid of him. But I mean, but it tells you that there are people within the union movement that believe that they can make a deal in a fascist state and survive, and that is very dangerous. And Black labor has to continue to be the voice to tell all workers that this does not happen, right? This does, workers will never survive in a fascist state, but they don't understand what it is. They don't even understand what capitalism is. And when you say socialism is a boogeyman, so as soon as you trigger the word, they shut down. So we have to talk to people about issues without necessarily categorizing the issue. So when I talk to my members, I talk about what's important to you, right? Do you want a better health plan? Do you want a better pension plan? Do you want better wages? You know, what are those things that you want? And not put it in a category, because, you know, I've been in office now, I'm the principal officer. I'm the longest serving principal officer in the Teamsters. I've been around about 36 years as the principal officer. And I remember being on a bus of workers and we were talking about the things that we wanted. And when I described what it could be, a gentleman said,
Hey, please wrap it up.
okay, we'll do. this is socialism. And I says, what do you care? What do you call it? If this is what you want, this is what you want. So that we have to break into these larger organizations. We have to get leadership and rank and file members to understand the reason for building this third party. And I want to just thank everybody here for the work that they do, because it is some really, really difficult work that we are embarking on with LCIP.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Donna. Really important and yeah, really important in the initial remarks, because getting the labor movement involved in this effort, as you said, despite the fact that most workers aren't unionized, the power of the labor movement itself is going to be required to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And the leadership is so tied at the hip to the Democratic Party that, as in my personal experience, first with the UAW, and I'm just starting with the California Faculty Association, it's hard to sort of even raise that. If the union leadership gets a whiff that you don't support Democrats, they'll ice you out. Or in my case, take me out for coffee every single day to tell me how I needed to vote Democrat or I was a horrible labor leader. And so my question that I'm taking a example from Harpreet to ask my question is, how would you recommend a rank and file union member, someone who's just newly in a union or has been around for a while maybe, engage with other union members to even start this conversation, to get involved in local politics, to do anything that is not voting for Democrats or Republicans? And then, since most people aren't in unions, also as a community member, is there any tips you can give to reach out to local unions and to begin these relationships?
Well, Coral, I would say you're in California and I'm in South Carolina, but from the workplace, your union should be in touch with you. Your union should be given an orientation when you go to work there. And, you know, they did that with AT&T, and we always use that 15 to 30 minutes to make sure that folks knew about the union. So somewhere I think there's some failure in the workplace. In the community piece, I think it's actually much easier because the community recognizes the strength of labor and they look to us to lead on important issues. And I think that, you know, if you look at the community groups that came together, like on No King's Day, the different groups, there were so many coalitions involved. So yes, I think, you know, that you can find those people from the unions. Like in South Carolina, it's hard, you know, because of our low percentage, but there's still people that really look up to labor and they think we can do great things. So go to the, you know, go to the leaders, and you can usually find those if you look under the different internationals. But the workplace thing is something that really should be resolved. Every workplace should have some type of orientation or a union board. You might look for a union board. You know, I don't know how big the workplace is, but we always had our union board as well.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to answer?
Yes, so I just wanted to say that I was just in Savannah, Georgia, not so long ago, and one of the activists from Black Workers for Justice was allowed access to the local union hall there, where they could meet and talk to the rank and file membership. And we have got to use local users. We got to use the churches. You know, so a lot of people go, oh, well, I have friends, you know, well, I'm a communist, I'm a socialist, and I don't deal with God. And I said, well, that's your personal business. But if you want to talk to people, the majority of them go to church, they believe in God or whatever like that. This is what's happening in this world today, right? And we need to be able to reach workers. We have to develop relationships with churches. We have to develop relationships at the local union level. All too often, I find people being uber critical of the labor bureaucracy, if you will. And it's not that the criticisms aren't somewhat accurate. It's just that you're not going to get me to help if you come in here beating me on the head on day one. And I think we have to go in with something that says there's something here for both of us, right? Because I don't think it's that these union leaders don't agree with our process, with what we want to do, is they can't see it. They don't have, they're not visionaries. They're just business people. So all they could see is, you know, am I getting another dollar tomorrow? You know, where's my profit going to come from this this plan? How do I get something out of it? I think that there is something to be said if we can have those conversations, because they're not socialists. I mean, I just talked to the #2 guy in our joint council, and when I questioned him about the fascist state, he says, well, you know, socialists, we don't do good with socialists either. And I said, you obviously don't know your history, because it was socialists and communists that built the labor movement. So, you know, they're not even aware. They're not even aware. So they're just business people. So we have to go and talk to them in a language that they understand, and then get to the membership, because the membership is feeling it. They're not feeling it. They have the union card. They have, you know, they're living at a little bit of a different level than the rank and file. But if you can get to the rank and file is in agreement. And I think Donna talked about is when you looked at No King's Day, when you look at what happened in New York City in the mayoral election, that's because the working class is feeling that, you know, the chokehold that's coming from the capitalist billionaire oligarch. You know, so the workers feel it. They workers know it. They're waiting for someone to come in the answer, and they think it's going to come from the union. The union has to now become a facilitator for the young bloods that's coming up. Certainly, I'm speaking from local way. We have to become the facilitators for the young bloods that are coming in, because we understand what that struggle is, and we have to be able to use your energy. We have to take your energy, and if we're not interacting our institutional knowledge with your energy, then we're going to fall short. But we have a lot of work to do, and Local 808 is committed to seeing this through.
Thank
Cole,
you.
let me mention something he said that's really important. During the Charleston Five, one of the successes of the campaign is the AFL-CIO sent staff in to work in those ministerial communities and all the community organizations. And they brought it all together for the success of that campaign. And the community loved it. They love being involved with the longshoremen. So it's really important.
Thank you. So we've got a few questions both in the general chat and from in the regular chat. Do either of you have concrete or specific examples of how labor has been positively engaged in independent politics, such as Vermont Progressive Party, for example? But are there other breakthroughs in terms of breaking from the democratic machine?
So I can speak to New York. We were, and the unions were instrumental in building the Working Families Party. However you want to critique them, I have my own sets of criticisms. But that was an attempt to break from the Democratic Party. And we were able to put that together. Ultimately, at the end of it, when confronted by the Democratic Party through Andrew Cuomo, the Democratic version of Donald Trump, when he showed up and made threats, they then stepped back away from the Working Families Party. And one of the things that has to happen is that there has to be a real relationship between the community groups and the unions. And one of the things that tend to happen is that the union tends to have a little bit of a ego, so that when the community groups should win on a point, they're like, no, we're out of here. If you're not going to do it our way, it's our way or the highway, and we have to get out of that business. We have to realize that we cannot do things the same way over and over and over again. At some point, we have to try something else.
Thank you.
And I agree with that. You know, the same thing happened with the Labor Party in South Carolina. We were the only line for the Labor Party in the country. But when they realized that it wasn't to the advantage of the national that was left, what was left of the National Party, actually the Democratic Party took us to court, and we had to take our candidates off the ballot over a real technical issue. But, you know, those are the things, that's what's so important about the campaigns, is bringing in the groups to work with in your community. And that's what LSIP is about. And whether it's the issues, you've got to have that base, and then you can build that political independence around that.
Thank you. So we have a few questions. So if I want to get to as many as possible. So let's say you're part of a union that is not open, doesn't have good onboarding, or is not democratic in structure. How do you start an insurgent organizing campaign? Or what advice do you have to someone who says, politics sucks, my union sucks, why shouldn't I just look out for myself?
It's happening everywhere. Chris just gave an example of it. We have seen, and Carl, you were in United Auto Workers, we keep seeing turnover after turnover, and now there's more turmoil in UAW. And I mean, I don't know how many officers were taken out of UAW before. We see it all the time. And once again, if you start at the local level, if you start with your local, start with your local and work from your local. And once again, the way that we got South Carolina union members involved, listen, when they saw what happened in the port, they're conservative in South Carolina. And there was only one way that we could get them involved. And that was a letter to their international presidents from President John Sweeney of the AFL-CIO. They will listen if their leadership speaks. That didn't mean everybody got involved. But international leaders should be leaders that can speak to the membership. And when they speak, they listen. And that's what we're not seeing in this day and time.
So when somebody says the union sucks, I always tell them to hold up a mirror and then repeat those same words. Because the union is not Chris Silvera, the union is its membership. So the first thing I would tell that person is to get a copy of the union's bylaws. Study it, know it. You should know your international constitution, right? You should be attending meetings, regardless of whether you're in agreement or disagreement. You should be attending those meetings. You should be reading books that can give you some perspective on labor and what's happening or what has happened in the labor movement and how we get to where we go. But I'll say this, nothing happens without organization. And so without the union, without LCIP, without organization, Boy Scout, Girl Scout, Major League, nothing happens without organization. And those are the words coming from A. Philip Randolph, who built the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. You have to have organization if you're going to exact anything from this society.
Thank you. Okay, for any panelists, how will AI's displacement of workers affect unions and building third parties?
I don't know.
Chris,
Go ahead.
You might have more on that. I do know that the International Longshoremen in their contract, that they had a wonderful contract. Chris, you may know more about it than I do, but they limited the use of, AI on the docks. That's not to say that in some cases it might benefit some unions, like writers and others, but I think you do have to look at the union, at what the work is to be performed, and and what it's going to do to the members. And I applaud ILA. They stood strong, and that was one thing they won. And I think that's what has to happen. Once again, I'm back to fearless leaders, and we don't have a whole lot of fearless leaders anymore.
Yeah. So you're not going to stop AI, right? So the question becomes, and this is why we have to transform society, and we have to really get on the move, because AI is either going to become our friend or our worst enemy. And so I think that unions have to now start thinking about the narrow trappings of a contract, wages, healthcare, pensions, and what have you, and start to deal with job preservation. So because as the technology comes, the demand now has to be, instead of a 40-hour week, we need a 30-hour week, or we need a 25-hour week without loss in pay. There has to be a new set of demands. We have a younger workforce that have children that don't want to sit on the job and work 50 hours of overtime a week or whatever, right? Those workers want to spend more time at home with their kids and what have you. And so that the union has to, and it's one of the reasons why we do what we do, right? We have to create, what does the 21st century workplace look like? And how do we protect workers? How do we protect a truck driver when they have self-driving trucks? Are we going to demand that that driver still remain in the truck, so just in case somebody hacks it from outer space, somebody can mash the brakes? We're going to have to make those demands, and that's where organization becomes very important. We have to demand protection for workers as technology advances at an ever-increasing pace.
And just to follow up, do you think there's how will this impact the building of independent working class political parties, AI?
Well, it's going to be the threat is going to be to what is the truth? What are the facts, right? I mean, that's going to, one of the things Albert Einstein said back in 1948, that this day was going to come when the concentration of media and sources of information becomes so narrow that you're not going to be able to tell what is the truth and what is not the truth. And we already see it separate from AI, how the media functions. I just watched the Namdani's race in New York, and George Carville, I think his name is Carville, whatever his name is, George or whatever, Carville, was saying, reflecting that this was a failure of the Democratic Party. Like the Democratic Party were the only people that voted. No, this is the working class of New York that voted for this guy. You know what I'm saying? So this is not a failure of the party, right? This is the workers sending a message to America that they want something different. And let me tell you something. This message has been going out since Ross Perot. And this use of the word like socialist and communist, George McGovern, who was from North or South Dakota, was labeled a communist because he was talking about certain things when it comes to living wages and so forth like that back in 72. And they labeled him a communist. I mean, George McGovern was so far from being a communist, it was a shame, right? So anytime you stand for the working class, you can ask Jesus Christ, you can ask Malcolm X, you can ask Martin Luther King, you could ask all the people throughout time that stood up for the working class. Anytime you stand up for the working class, you're going to be labeled in a way that makes other people afraid, and we have to break that stranglehold on knowledge.
Yeah, and I think what Chris said is true about, will it impact a third party? I think it will help because it's a subject that's not going away. Like Chris said, it's going to be talked about, it's going to be discussed in contracts. And I think that's going to push folks to look for, people that will stand up for them. And the Democrats and the Republicans are definitely not standing up for working people. So I think it would be certainly a beneficial thing because it's going to be talked about a lot. And we need to inject the fact that we need people with spines, to be able to speak for the working class.
Thank you so much. That brings us to time. I am so appreciative of having such an amazing panel. I know we had our issues at the beginning, but I really, really appreciate what you had to say. Thank you so much. We have a 20-minute break, 19 now. So please don't leave. Come back. We have 2 more amazing panels and a plenary and a closing speaker. And I think, yeah, it's just we're gonna continue to build this movement and hear some great activists and leaders. Thank you so much. So come back at 11:21. We'll return. Thank you so much.